to the third week of Aging Through the Ages. And I'm very happy to see you all again this week. And I'm very excited about this week. I think we're going to have a good class with a lot of good information for you to take home, so to speak. So I'm going to share my screen. And I also want to welcome Rabbi Mishkin, who will be our my other friend this week, because as you know, Rabbi Perlman is getting ready for her daughter's wedding. This week, we're going to talk about family and friends and how that's related to the issues of aging through the ages. And our quote for this week is, "Oil and incense gladden the heart, and the sweetness of a friend is better than one's own counsel." So clearly, and it's from the Book of Proverbs, which I'll talk about a little later. And clearly it indicates that friendship is valued by the Tanakh. And we'll start with our blessing. Anybody want to lead it? Or I just will. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We can unmute and say amen. Okay, today's agenda. Can everybody hear me? Yes. We're going to review a quick review of the last class, and then we'll go into this week's topic, family and friends. And I'll talk about the biblical themes, which include the fundamental role of honoring others, biblical wisdom regarding family and friends in the Book of Proverbs, or Mishlei. And I'll talk about an ideal example of biblical companionship, which is the narrative of Ruth, a narrative that you've probably all heard multiple times, but it's always wonderful to be able to look at a narrative through a different kind of lens. And I think that enriches the narrative for us, just like we read the Torah year after year after year, we read the same parshiot year after year, but the goal is for us to get something new every week that they're read. And then Susan, of course, will address contemporary approaches, and Rabbi Mishkin will address rabbinic and spiritual wisdom, and then we'll have a summary and a Q&A. So last session, we talked about healthy living and healthy aging. And in our very first class, introductory class, we addressed aging from a macro societal level. And in the last class, healthy living and healthy aging, we viewed the issue through a more individual perspective. And from a biblical perspective, we learned that lifespan and quality of life matters. We learned that there are a variety of biblical approaches to these concerns. One is the traditional perspective that righteous behavior is key to a long and well-lived life, as exemplified in the Abraham narrative. Another is the striving for meaning in our lives, and that's represented by the psalmist's appeal to God for understanding and how to live a meaningful life. And then we looked at Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, an example of skeptical wisdom, in which means that God's ways are unknowable. And so Kohelet decides that the best thing for us to do is to strive to enjoy life, to eat well, to enjoy the companionship of our friends, to keep our clothes clean, etc. Susan presented us with the modern perspective, and we learned about facts and common misconceptions about old age. Very interesting discussion. 1 second. We learned about strategies for healthy living and healthy aging. And from a rabbinic perspective, we learned that living well means embracing all aspects of living, including aging and the inevitability of death. We learned that with the perspective of age, we can reframe our story and soften the challenging parts of our narrative, perhaps. We learned that to live life guided by the Torah precept, Uvacharta b'chaim, choose life. And we learned that healthy aging is living with joy, resilience, and gratitude. Okay, so for this week, friends and family, we're going to look at the biblical themes, and the first theme I want to focus on is the fundamental role of honoring others. As we have discussed in past weeks, honoring elders is a mitzvah, which is found in the Parsha Kedoshim in the book of Leviticus. And that Parsha describes ethical and cultic rules that the Israelites must follow to make themselves a holy people. Kedoshim also includes, among all of the mitzvot, 2 other mitzvot, which are particularly applicable to this week's theme. And the first is that you shall revere your mother and your father and keep my Sabbaths. I am your God. And from this quote, we see that revering one's parents and keeping the Sabbath are in the same mitzvah, or 2 parts of the same mitzvah, which indicates how incredibly important revering mother and father are. Revering in Hebrew can mean fearing, but mostly it means to respect. The other quote, which relates to friends and family, is that you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. That means the Israelite people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am the Lord. It doesn't speak directly to friends, but basically it says that in order to have a successful society, everybody must respect others. So friends certainly fall in that category. And these mitzvot demonstrate the fundamental role of honoring others, the fundamental role it plays in securing a successful, holy society. And the themes of these mitzvot appear throughout the Tanakh. Tonight, we will look especially at 2 sources, the Book of Proverbs and the story of Ruth. One of the reasons why we're looking at the Book of Proverbs is because I like to introduce, we could probably do this whole course by looking at the narratives of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. But I think it's important to look at the entire Tanakh because it is our gift, and there are different perspectives in the different books of the Tanakh. And so I like to give a fuller view when I'm talking about the subject. So tonight we're talking about the Book of Proverbs. It's the 2nd book in the writings, or the Ketuvim, and it is a book of wisdom containing guidance for living a wise, moral, and righteous life in the form of poems and short statements, which we would commonly call proverbs. Unlike the text of Ecclesiastes or Kohelet, which exemplifies the genre of skeptical wisdom, the contents of the Book of Proverbs represents conventional wisdom. That is, Proverbs asserts that human action has consequences, good people are rewarded, and bad people are punished for their behavior. As you can see in this quote, he who has regard for his life pays regard to commandments. He who is heedless of his ways will die. So unfortunately, I've lost 2 quotes, but I can tell you that in the Book of Proverbs, there are many quotes that reflect on the need for children to honor their parents. And in fact, when children don't honor their parents, there can be very nasty consequences. there's the concept that if a child does not honor his parents, that he'll have his eyes pecked out by a bird. And so we also find in Proverbs that we can face a situation in which a child who dishonors his parents may be actually replaced in the family unit. We learn that a capable servant will dominate an incompetent son and share the inheritance with the brothers. So the concept of incompetent in the book of Proverbs and in other books of wisdom literature really refers to the difference between a wise person and someone who does not act in a wise way. So that's what that means. And one who does not act in a wise way, particularly a son, is one who does not observe the responsibilities of a proper son and does not honor his parents. And yes, I say his because in the book of Proverbs, there's, as an ancient book, the references are all male. I want to point out that for context, that it is notable that the society described in Mishle, like that in Kohelet, which we looked at last week, appears to be a hierarchical, patriarchal, and monogamous society with an emphasis on the nuclear family. It also appears to be a society that was fairly well-to-do. So these are the rules to preserve that kind of a society. Mishle also, with respect to friendship, is one of the few books in the Bible that actually speaks to the concept of friendship. And it sings the praises of friendship as a valuable asset in one's life. So we find quotes like these: oil and incense gladden the heart, and the sweetness of a friend is better than one's own counsel, as we read a little while ago. A friend is devoted at all times. A brother is born to share adversity. And there are companions to keep one company, and there is a friend more devoted than a brother. So the concept of friendship is extraordinarily important. The concept of individuals being dependent on their friends is an acceptable concept, and in fact, a praiseworthy concept. In sum, Mishle provides guidance for behaviors necessary for the maintenance of successful interpersonal relationships, which are integral to maintaining the social order. Arguably, some of this guidance is timeless. And in as much as I have a number of my friends on this, watching this, I can tell you that your sweetness is better than mine own counsel, for sure. Now let's go to the Book of Ruth, which I know that all of you on this call have probably read many times. We read it on the holiday of Shavuot. There are many themes in the Book of Ruth. But what I want to talk about tonight is how the Book of Ruth exemplifies the wisdom of the Proverbs. It is a narrative of how lives and, in fact, society can be transformed through the kindness of friends and family. So we'll review the story, which, as I say, you may know, but let's look at it through this particular lens. As a consequence of famine in the land of Israel, Elimelech, Naomi, and their two sons have to escape to the land of Midian. In a cruel turn of fate, Naomi is widowed and her two sons die. She is left with her two Midianite daughters-in-law. Knowing that she cannot physically provide new husbands for her daughters-in-law, she pleads that they return to their parents. In other words, technically, if she could have additional children, the younger brothers of the deceased brothers would be eligible for marriage to these daughters-in-law, and they could still maintain the family legacy. But clearly, the women are, the daughters-in-law are older, and even if Naomi could have the children, they would be way too young for anything practical like that to happen. And so Naomi says to her daughters-in-law, should you debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters-in-law, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. So we're not quite sure how old Ruth is here, but clearly the circumstances of her life have made her probably old before her time. Ruth, of the two daughters-in-law, insists that she be allowed to return to Israel with Naomi. And when we know this well, let your people be my people, and those lovely words that Ruth tells Naomi. And they arrive back in Bethlehem, and we learn that the enormity of Naomi's tragedy has taken obvious toll on her. The whole city buzzed with excitement over them. And then the women said, can this be Naomi? Do not call me Naomi, which means pleasantness, she replied. Call me Mara, which means bitterness, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. So clearly, the townspeople and the women in the town didn't even recognize Naomi. She had changed so radically as a consequence of her circumstances. And how many times have we felt this way? How many times, especially, do older people possibly feel this way? I would say more than not. So then what happens is the two women are living together, and they're living together in poverty. And so Naomi sends Ruth out to begin to collect the gleanings of the harvest of Boaz, who by biblical coincidence is a family member of her deceased father-in-law. So when I say biblical coincidence, it means that there's sort of a divine hand involved here. When I say collecting the gleanings, what happens is that the farmers were required to leave the edges of their field for the poor, so that the poor could collect them and eat. It turns out that Ruth ends up on the fields belonging to Boaz. Boaz then sees Ruth, and he employs her to glean exclusively in his field. When she asks why he's being so kind to a foreigner, we learn that Ruth's reputation as Naomi's companion has preceded her. Boaz said in reply, I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people who you had not known before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense for the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. So clearly, the value of respect and care for an older person, for a mother and father, was one that Ruth respected and brought to this situation. And she was being rewarded for it by virtue of her reputation going before her. Naomi, as a consequence of Ruth's companionship and kindness, seeks to repay her. And she says, daughter, I must see a home for you where you may be happy. I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Just as an aside, when Naomi calls Ruth daughter, it's not just that she's calling her daughter-in-law daughter. It's actually a word in Hebrew that is used by older people to describe younger people. So it reflects that Naomi is probably an older person at this point. So Naomi comes up with a plan to secure Boaz's favor for Ruth. And it involves Ruth going down to Boaz's threshing floor and lying next to him. And there's this whole little scene. And as a consequence, Boaz asks Ruth to marry him. And also, he redeems the property that had been owned by the deceased Elimelech, which his poverty-stricken widow Naomi is forced to sell. Thereby, Boaz secures Elimelech's legacy, a topic that we'll discuss further next week. But this was a biblical, by Boaz buying or redeeming Elimelech's property and marrying Elimelech's widow. He was doing the mitzvah of allowing Elimelech's legacy to still remain. And that is a very important point in ancient Israel. So, and once again, as all this is happening, Boaz praises Ruth's reputation. He exclaimed, "Be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, the deed of agreeing to marry him, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich." That is, she sought out a kinsman of her dead husband, ensuring that his property would remain in her family line, and she and her mother-in-law would be able to survive comfortably. And now, daughter, here he also uses the word daughter, so we can assume that Boaz is not a younger man. Have no fear, I will do in your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. So here we know that Ruth's reputation not only extends to the women of the town, not only extends to Naomi's family, but also extends throughout the town. This line helps us to understand how important the concept of companionship and care is in the Bible, because the elders of the town would not know of all this if it were not discussed all over the town, or in the town square, as they would say. So Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife, and he cohabitated with her. And the Lord let her conceive, and she bore a son. The women of the city, who barely recognized Naomi when she returned from Moab, are now joyful at her transformation. Her new grandson, they say of her, her new grandson will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom, and she became its foster mother. And the women and neighbors gave him a name, saying, "A son is born to Naomi." So even here, Ruth's behavior allows Naomi to have a legacy. And they named the child Obed. And Obed was the father of Jesse. And in fact, Jesse was the father of King David. We learn from all of this that friendship and respect for elders is a mitzvah, and a respected mitzvah. And this is it's a lovely story, but it's also rather a very serious story. And so now we're going to go from the biblical texts, and I'm going to turn this over to Susan, and she can talk about the modern texts. Susan?
So Annette's portions reflected honor, respected care for elders and elders. And what I want to talk about is how in contemporary times we can use current knowledge and resources to provide some guidance and support in practicing those values. Thanks. And So if we can have some guidance and support in practicing those values, that can contribute to the well-being and dignity of elders. So I'm going to begin with the people whom elders have relied upon throughout the ages, and that's family and friends. Okay, so we'll look at some contemporary times talking about family and friends, and how we can also talk about using current knowledge and information to help us in honoring, respecting our elders. So last week I made the point that we can't ignore that we age. And aging is a process whereby changes occur throughout our lifespan. And along the way, we can choose to adopt lifestyles that support healthy aging. But this also means accepting and receiving assistance that helps us maintain our ability to do the things we want to do for as long as possible. And if we're lucky and intentional, we're in a position to benefit from our community, friends, and family as both a giver and as a receiver of help, and now and as we age. And so our towns might have programs such as Helping Hands, which assist neighbors in times of need. Your synagogue has a caring community that helps members who are facing life's challenges and bereavement. And we have family and friends that help out on an occasional or regular basis. During the pandemic, many of us reached out to elders in our community, in our family, in our neighborhood to help out more frequently and in new ways. And so we give and we receive, and what we give and what we receive changes over time. So we take pride in being independent at many different stages of our lives, but the truth is connection and interdependency play roles throughout our lives. And elders may find that they have daily needs that require some help, but they also find themselves with more opportunities to share their wisdom and life experiences with the young and old. Young and middle-aged adults might find they are helping our parents and grandparents throughout the week, but also can find themselves learning more about life, aging, and intergenerational connection. So it's that giving and receiving that can go both ways all the time. But I'd like you, I can't see you all, but I'd like you just to think for just a moment of when your offer of help to someone was accepted and how it made you feel. And also think of a time when you yourself accepted help and how it makes you feel. It can be hard to accept the need for assistance at any time, and especially as we age, perhaps, and we might have some negative feelings and thoughts about about aging or fear of losing our independence. And those who want to help may also feel some unease in the changes as well. In Wise Aging, Living with Joy, Resilience, inspired by Rabbi Rachel Cohen and Dr. Linda Thole, they quote philosopher Sarah Ruddick on the subject of wise aging as being independence joined with a willingness to acknowledge one's limitations and accept help in ways that are gratifying to the helper. So I think that also shows that win-win situation of giving and receiving. And so we talk about helping and helping others, different times of life, helping of honor and respect of our elders. And we hear the term caregiver used. And I just wanted to just share a little bit about the terminology of it for a moment. People might have heard of formal caregivers, and those are professionals who are paid for their service to aid an older adult or perhaps an adult with disabilities. They aid with their daily needs, and the formal caregivers have an education and training to provide the appropriate care needed. Informal caregivers are not paid for caregiving responsibilities, and they're typically family, friends, or members of an adult's social circle. So that would be informal caregivers would be more of what Annette was talking about in biblical times. And now we have formal caregivers as well. So some informal caregivers might do as much as a professional caregiver. And whereas other informal caregivers might just be doing some assistance on an occasional basis, or perhaps a regular basis. And some informal caregivers live far away and provide help from a distance. But examples of caregiving that we can see is transportation to medical appointments, grocery shopping, food preparation, and others could be work that's assistance that helps through technology in terms of coordinating services or working on health insurance issues or on benefits and things like that. So caregiving really is a spectrum of hands-on care as well as a lot of other supportive care that's out there. But we don't necessarily think of ourselves as caregivers when we're providing the assistance that just feels natural to us. And I'd say that we typically don't call ourselves a caregiver. The person we're helping as a family member or friend doesn't call us a caregiver. We just think of ourselves as being a helper and having a caring role. But I'm going to just put out there that sometimes we should think of the word caregiver, even if we don't call ourselves or the person helping us a caregiver, who's family, friend, or part of our community. But we should think of that term, because when we think of that term, we can really find a lot of information and resources that can help a person providing assistance, help, as well as an older person looking for assistance and help. The term caregiver will pull up a lot of resources. So we know that acts of kindness and volunteering really helps our well-being, and it helps us achieve, healthy aging, and helps with our longevity. And I found this interesting piece about caregivers, and which is not a new study, but they found that people who are occasional voluntary caregivers to others live longer lives than individuals who are not. And when you think about it, an occasional voluntary caregiver is one of a volunteer into providing kind acts, which we know are really beneficial to our well-being and our positive outlook. But we also know that caregiving can be difficult and it can be stressful. And so just as an older adult engages in lifestyles that support healthy aging, actually any adult can adopt those behaviors that help with healthy aging. A caregiver should practice self-care that support their physical and mental health, which in turn will help their healthy aging as well. And so, we're always at our best when we care for ourselves, as well as when we're also caring for others. And so I wanted just to go just quickly, many of you this will look very familiar as we do self-care for ourselves in general, but self-care for caregivers, whether they're professional caregivers, informal caregivers, occasional caregivers, things to remember are about taking a break and tending to our own needs, and eating right and exercising and sleeping well, exploring ways to reduce stress. It might include meditation and journal writing, gratitude journals, and also seeking support from the synagogue, a support group, or mental health professionals through counseling. And another important part of self-care is being compassionate with ourselves. We juggle many responsibilities and we might have many different caring roles as an older adult, having a role for a friend or a spouse or partner, as a sandwich generation, raising children, working, and also caring for parents and grandparents at times. We all have a lot to juggle. And so it's always important to think about that self-care of ourselves. And so I mentioned by using the term caregiver kind of opens up a lot of resources that are available. If you were to Google caregiver, you'd find articles in a lot of places through AARP, for Alzheimer's Association, through senior centers, and through by National Institute of Health, NIH. And so thinking of that term, no matter where we are on the spectrum of caregiving, can be, that term can be put to good use. And so knowledge, of course, is always important. We know that. That's why we're all here and go to classes from synagogues and such. But if you're an older adult, or an older adult who cares for another older adult, or you're caring for an older adult, or just care about an older adult, it's important to take advantage of all the information out there online and in the community. There's a lot that can be learned about navigating questions and concerns about aging and the services available, care that's available, including things such as transportation options, in-home services, housing options, and more. And there are services that can help an older adult remain independent in their home, so older adults who want to, or people who are anywhere as an adult and looking ahead, can find a lot of information about that can help people age in place and remain in their homes. Or the resources and services can help relieve the responsibility of informal caregivers. And I like to think if we can relieve some of the responsibilities that can be carried by someone else, it can provide those friends and family and loved ones more opportunity to enjoy time with the person they're helping out, doing other things that might not be, that might bring other social aspects and mental health aspects to being together. So it's important to know in advance where to turn for assistance, and know the programs that are there to help you plan ahead so that you can help manage any unforeseen needs or crises that arise. Always knowing that we never know what's going to happen. That's why, but we never know what's going to happen. But it's good to have some knowledge of what's available, so we don't end up having to find everything at a moment's notice. And it's always, of course, important to continue to cultivate and find and maintain networks that help us support and assist each other, including synagogue, friends, and family. And during all of this, it's always important to learn about healthy aging at any age, so that we ourselves can help age well, and we can model good, healthy aging to the young, and we can age well as we get older. So I'm going to go just do some resources. And of course, I can take questions at the end about where to find certain types of resources, or if they even exist. And sometimes when you start looking into some of the websites or making phone calls about resources, you'll find that there are resources that you might never have known about. And so I'm kind of starting at the top at eldercare.gov, which is the federal government national website that can help locate more local resources. And the reason I'm saying this is that some of us might go from state to state, or we have friends or family in other states who are looking for resources. So eldercare.gov is one site to go to. And then there's New York State Office for the Aging, and which you can provide more information on the statewide level. And then Nassau County, where I looked up, and that's where Port Washington is, so I hope I'm correct, can provide more of the local resources. So if you go to the local resource, if you go to Nassau County, you'll call the number or click on. But if you call the number, you'll have information assistance. And that's what all state and local communities have, is free information assistance. And that information assistance can help with specifics, or if there's, or help steer you to where you can go for more information. Area agencies on aging, I had mentioned, I think in the first class, is federally funded through the state and goes locally. And those area agencies on aging work with senior centers. And that's where you'll find a lot of the programming, evidence-based healthy aging programs, fall prevention programs, information about Medicare, about before you start Medicare, you can find out about it, and you can find out more later as you on and learn about Social Security. You can find support groups. You can get technology classes, Meals on Wheels, transportation, the list kind of goes on and on. And so just by calling, talking to someone from information assistance, getting to your local area agency or aging or a senior center, you can even connect with a case manager or social worker who can even provide more help navigating the system, finding what you need. I'm not real specific, and every state uses their area agencies on aging and senior centers a little bit differently. So you'll have to kind of just start off with that first number and go from there. And then of course there are Jewish Family and Children Services out there as well that provide different programming. And so when I was working with JFS in Massachusetts, they had a patient navigation program where they had volunteers trained to provide transportation to medical appointments. And for those seniors who wanted it, they would go on the medical appointment, and they were trained to help guide and advocate for the senior in the medical appointment, which was especially helpful for older adults without family nearby, or might have been solo seniors and did not have someone to go with them. And so there are different programs out there. And then AARP does a lot around caregiving because of the millions of caregivers there are in the country. They have a lot of articles about being a caregiver, about being a male caregiver, about being a caregiver for a spouse, self-care for caregivers, et cetera, and National Council on Aging has also some information. So what I want to say about it is that information referral services are free. Services and programs, many of them are at no cost or a sliding scale. And then there are some fee-for-service services as well that are in the nonprofit arena and also in the profit arena. And so I'll end with that and take any questions afterwards. But I think it's important as we help and learn about what we ourselves need as we age, that we really do look for, now in modern times, all these resources that are available, and information, education, et cetera, around the whole topic.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much for bringing that very practical approach to us. Rabbi.
Hello, everyone. That was great. Susan, really enjoyed it. And Annette, thank you for your opening presentation. I'm going to try to share my screen as well. In talking about companionship, whether it's family or friends, and the importance of companionship, Rabbi Harold Kushner has a very powerful teaching. He writes, God is very present in our lives, even when we suffer, maybe especially when we suffer. He talks about the best way to be a friend to others in pain. He says, there's always something you can do to help, even if it's just to sit down and help them cry. The alternative is that you leave them there to cry alone. He reinforced this point by citing the results of a University of Wisconsin psychology study. The subject was asked to sit with one foot in a bucket of ice water. Researchers found that the presence of another person in the room doubled the amount of pain a person could endure. The single most important thing I've learned personally and from those that I care about, said Kushner, is that why me is not a question. It's a cry of pain. You respond to the crying person by consolation, not explanation. To the aggrieved, he dismissed why as a futile question, a helpless search for something that cannot be found. Rather than ask why, he said, ask yourself, how do I go on? As a rabbi, he said, I'm always seeing ordinary people do extraordinary things. The only place you'll find an answer is in your own heart. So the second piece is nice too, but the part that I really wanted to focus on was this idea of just having one person present, supporting you, can give you the strength and give you meaning and give you purpose, where you can endure more pain, this question here of how do I go on? It's easier to answer that question when you have people in your life, people who care about you, people who are present, and when we do that for others. So a really very, powerful statement about the importance of family and friends serving as companions, for anybody who's in pain, but certainly for people who are aging and going through that process where body parts hurt and some of the things that they could do before they can't do, and losing some of their independence, as we've talked about in this class, and as you all know, very, very painful transit. It can be, it's such a difficult transition. So hopefully we have people in our lives who are there for us. And as Susan was just saying, in addition to your own family and friends, being connected to community, there are people there as well. Maybe, in some ways it's a little different, but in other ways, when people show up and they care about you and they say, we want to be there, that's very powerful too. I want to look at caregiving. I'm going to focus more specifically on parents, but it's obviously not just about parents. But the parent one is an interesting model to look at, because from the Torah's point of view, that's the most important relationship, parents and teachers. And parents are considered your teachers as well as help partners in creating you. And we have the mitzvot of honoring and revering our parents. It's in the 10 Commandments as the 5th commandment, kabed et avicha v'et imecha. You should honor your father and your mother. And then Annette opened up her presentation with a line from Leviticus, Ish imo v'aviv tirau. A person should revere his mother and his father. And so you have this word kabed, honor, and you have this word tirau, of revering or obeying. And so one question is, what's the similarities and what's the differences in these commands? And many people, many of you may think about them as, oh, well, a child is supposed to revere their parents and obey their parents. When our children are young, when they're adolescents, when they're in their teen years, I'm sure there's a great wish that kids would revere us and listen to us and do what we say and obey us. And of course, sometimes that happens, and depending on the dynamic, it can happen more or less, but also there's plenty of times when that doesn't happen. The Torah is not really talking about that per se. I mean, that is true throughout our lives. We're supposed to have a certain level of respect for our parents. So it does apply then as well, but it's also talking to full-fledged adults. At least the kabed, the honor one is really talking about full-fledged adults and what we owe our parents as they age. I'm going to show that to you in the Talmud right now. I don't know if you've used, if we've used it in this group or not, a website called Sefaria. Here, it's right up here, sefaria.org, but it's an incredible compilation of Jewish texts. Many of them are translated, not all of them, but I believe they have now the whole Talmud translated online and free. So let's look. We're in the tractate of Kiddushin, which is about getting engaged and getting married, but there are a lot of tangents that it goes on, including family relationships of the bride and groom and things like that. So it's going to talk about honoring and revering parents. All right, so here's what it says on page 31b of the Talmud. The sages taught what is fear and what is honor. The words, right? Morah and kibud, those are Honor comes from Exodus, from the Ten Commandments. It's also in Deuteronomy when it repeats the Ten Commandments. And morah, fear, awe, revere, comes from Leviticus. Fear of one's father, and here it's, even though it says it talks about the mother and the father, but here they're just mentioning the father. Fear of one's father includes the following: one may not stand in his father's fixed place, and may not sit in his place, and may not contradict his statements by expressing an opinion contrary to that of his father, and he may not choose sides when his father argues with someone else. It really applies to the mother as well. And so that would be for a child of any age, including an adult. It doesn't say you can't disagree with them, but this is really talking about contradicting them publicly and also the way that you do it, that the tone matters. And then what is considered honor? This from the Ten Commandments: honor your father and your mother. He gives his father food and drink, dresses and covers him, and brings him in and takes him out for all of his household needs. So this one of honor in the Ten Commandments is really about taking care of our parents as they get older. And I think an interesting question is, what are the limits of this obligation? Well, what does the obligation mean, and then what are the limits? I'm interested in both of those questions, in taking care of our parents. There's a little teaching right after that says, in terms of the money of buying food for your parents, if there are professional healthcare workers, professional aides, that the money actually comes from the parents. It's not obligated that it comes from the child unless the parents don't have the money and the child does have the money. Let's look though at first more of a maximal view of what we could do or what we should do. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Tarfon had a certain manner of treating his mother, that whenever she wished to ascend into her bed, he would bend over and help her to ascend. I don't know if that means he's bending over and grabbing her foot. It almost could mean, I'm almost envisioning he's getting down on his hands and knees and she's using him as a step. And whenever she wished to descend from the bed, she would descend on him. He came and he praised himself in the study hall for performing the mitzvah of honoring one's father and mother so thoroughly. And they said to him, "You still have not reached even half of the honor due to her. Has it ever happened to you that she threw a purse in the sea, a purse full of money, into the sea in front of you, and you did not embarrass her?" All right, so I want to deal with that second part last. The first part is, in terms of the mitzvah of taking care of our parents, it's considered to be the highest level of fulfilling that mitzvah, the more that we can do. The more that we can do for them, because to a certain extent, we're going to love them and care for them in a way that a stranger wouldn't, or even a professional. So the things that you can do, that you have the time to do and that you can do, are seen as praiseworthy. And there's almost no limit to what we can do for our parents. If we think about what they've done for us, including bringing us into the world and supporting us and taking care of us and everything else that comes along with that. So Rabbi Tarfon was feeling good about himself, and they said, okay, that's nice, but there's a lot more that you can do. Then the second part, they said to him, has it ever happened that your mom threw a purse full of money into the sea in front of you and you didn't embarrass her? That's another case that's given in this section of the Talmud of a parent doing that to a child. And even first of all, some of these stories, the commentaries say it's very likely that they had some cognitive issues, right? Because someone in their right mind is probably not going to do that. So then, obviously, almost anything a person does that you're caring for, or someone you care about, if they have cognitive issues, and you recognize that, that they're not necessarily acting of their own free will or in a way they understand, we need to have as much compassion and empathy as possible. And when it comes to our parents, even more so. Doesn't mean that you have to give them another wallet full of money. You can make sure that they, even if they ask for money, if they're starting to waste it and show a lack of understanding of how to use it, doesn't mean that you have to keep giving them money even if they ask for it. But if they do something like that in front of you, you can't say, "Are you out of your mind, you idiot? What are you doing?" That's basically prohibited, and it's about maintaining someone's dignity and having a certain empathy for them. All right, I just want to look at one other text, and then maybe I can take questions and comments on this, and we can also just take larger questions and comments. And this is a little bit on one of the limits of what is required of us taking care of our parents, and also how much more so in taking care of others. Because again, taking care of the obligation to care for our parents is the greatest obligation that we have. All right, so it's right here on 32a. This is talking about not getting angry. Sorry, this was the case where he threw the money in the sea in front of another rabbi, and you're not allowed to really. You can get angry, but you're not really allowed to speak to your parents in anger. Now, if they're doing something that's endangering their life or something that's dangerous and you need to yell at them to stop, that's different. Here again, they've already thrown the money into the water. You can't retrieve it and it's a done deal. But in terms of not getting angry at a parent, this is reflected in an incident involving a rabbi named Rabba bar Rav Huna. When Rav Huna, the rabbi's name is Rabba and his father is Rav Huna. So Rav Huna, the father, tore a very expensive silk garment in front of his son Rabba. Rav Huna had said to himself, I will go and see if he becomes angry or does not become angry, i.e., he wanted to test him to see whether his son Rabba would honor him and follow this precept of not getting angry at him. The Gemara asks, but perhaps his son would become angry, and that's a violation of a mitzvah, of one of the laws, and so Rav Huna would thereby violate the prohibition. No, sorry. So the son would be angry, which would be a violation, and the father, Rav Huna, would violate a different prohibition, and that is not putting a stumbling block before the blind, as by testing his son, Rav Huna would have caused him to sin. The Gemara answers, okay, he says the father gave up his honor in that situation, so it wouldn't be a sin. But I'm not as interested in that last part. So according to this last teaching, someone who is of right mind and knows what's going on, they need. I'm going to extrapolate beyond not tearing something expensive in front of your child to see if they're going to get angry or not. The principle there is you don't want to do something that's going to hurt your child or upset them in a way where they may lash out at you or they may have really negative feelings towards you. And so there's a responsibility on the person to also take into account how their words, their actions, their demands and their requests are being heard by their children or by if it's a professional caregiver, it's a little different, but even then, of course, you want to try to honor and respect their dignity as much as possible. So like everything in life, there's this balance, because on the one hand, sometimes people in general, when they're sick or elderly people, will say, I'm not going to reach out to my kids, even when I need them. I don't want to be a burden on them. And that's not good either. You need to tell people when you want things and when you need things, and hopefully with your children, and hopefully children with their parents can kind of figure out a system. It's like, I'm not working on these days. I want to be with you and do this. I want to do that. Other days I have work. I can't be with you. They may also in their own minds be like, I can't do all of these things for you because mentally, it's not good for me. And maybe I have, my own children or my own family. I have to make sure that I'm balancing it. A situation where parent would want their child to be with them 24/7 and give up their own life, then that goes to the other side of the balance, which is as much as we can acknowledge and think about what our comments, our requests, and our demands on our children are. If we're aware of it, we don't want to do things that put them in a situation, that make it overly difficult, or where they feel like they're being taken advantage of in a way. So it's a delicate balance. I mean, of course, every relationship is different. These are just guiding principles. But, I think we see the extremes in both situations, and finding some place in the middle is the real challenge. The situation where someone's taking care of someone and they're making tons of demands, or sometimes I know people where the children, for a variety of reasons want to be helping the parents in need all the time, which in some ways is beautiful, but in other ways, if these people, if they're married, if they have spouses, if they have kids, and if they have other responsibilities, sometimes they sacrifice things that maybe they shouldn't, and then sometimes you also have where someone won't reach out and tell them anything that they need, and that's not good either. So it's really a balance. It's a very, very powerful and important mitzvah, of taking care of people as they get older, especially parents. We should do some of it personally if we can, and the more we can, the more praiseworthy if we're doing it in a respectful way. But there are limits to what the parent can ask, and there are limits and for the child to also be able to say no. And as I said, I mean, sometimes it works out very easily, but I think very often in these situations, the balance is not. There's different views between the person who needs the caregivers and the caregivers, and hopefully there's can be open dialogue and a respectful dialogue to try to find a place that works for everybody.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I think it's been a very interesting evening from the sense of looking at the ideal situation of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, which is just seems to, there's just nothing wrong in that story. Everybody does what they need for other people, and they all benefit by it, as does society, because the outcome is King David. And then the rabbi has brought some of the more difficult, it's not all that simple. And it's not simple for the children, it's not simple for the parents. And so Susan gave us some possibilities for practical possibilities for dealing with this situation. And so I hope that people can put all that information together in your own minds and come to some of your own conclusions. So are there any questions?
I just actually want to make one other comment. There was some nice kind of tying in of the three presentations. But one thing that Annette didn't say, which she knows very well, is, and many of us may know from the other stories in the Torah, Annette picked Naomi and Ruth because that is such a great story of companionship and of Ruth helping the elder person in supporting her. And then there was a two-way street. They both benefited. But there are many, many stories in Tanakh in the Bible where there's challenges and between parents and children as they age and they don't get it right. King David's a very famous one. There's a ton of chaos around his life with his kids as he's getting older and older and closer to death. Although Abraham is almost on the other side of the coin, that things are very good. There was still a complication with a breach in the family when he had sent out Hagar and his other son Ishmael, and then Ishmael only comes back in the scene for his funeral. So and there's other examples as well. So the Torah definitely doesn't present, that this is easy, and the Torah doesn't present that everyone gets it right. So like one of the great things about Torah is it's a very realistic view often of humanity.
Thank you, Rabbi. Are there for next week, we're going to be talking about creating a legacy, and that the time is now. So it's not anything that we have to wait for, and we'll talk about that next week. And does anybody have any questions? It's been great having you all, and please chime in.
Barbara, Susan, I thought Susan's hand first. Susan, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, all of you. I was thinking as Susan in particular was going through her presentation about how important it is to find ways for the elderly to be more helpful than we think they can be. And there are an awful lot of things to do in your community where it can be simple tasks. You sit on a committee or you take part in a discussion group or something like that, but every town has them, and every town has a way to engage the elderly in their communities so that they feel like they're being helpers as well. And I don't want it to feel one-sided. It isn't one-sided. And I think that we can all gain an awful lot from people who are older than we are. Just as we think our kids are gaining knowledge from us if they're listening. I feel that there's an awful lot for those of us who are in our 50s, 60s, 70s to learn from people who are older than we are. And there's an awful lot that they can still contribute to society and feel good about their being helpers as well. And I think it's up to us to help find those things. That's just what I want to say.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. It's a good point.
Anybody else?
Barbara Taffet. Yeah, Barbara, please.
Well, I just wanted to reflect on Rabbi Tarfon. I think that story, it makes me laugh every time I think about it, because where is Rabbi Tarfon's wife? Where is Rabbi Tarfon's children? While he's spending all this time helping his mother in and out of bed, and I think there's some other stories in there about other things that he does. So the conclusion that the rabbi left us with, that there is a balance here, that sometimes you can be the caregiver and sometimes you need someone else, another family member, a friend, a professional caregiver. I would not like to take Rabbi Tarfon as an example.
You know, there's another story right around there of a rabbi who's got like 4 sons, and they're all learning in the yeshiva, in the academy. But when his father comes, when the you know, like, so it's the grandfather, the younger kids, the father goes to greet him at the door, even though the other kids could, because he wants to show a certain, I mean, he's also modeling, I guess, for his kids, and he wants to show a certain level of respect to his father. So, you know, there are times where the child, not the grandchild or not the daughter-in-law, you know, where that's, if you can do it, you do it, you know. And then there's certainly times maybe where you can't, or where other people can do it and can do it in a loving way. Rabbi Avi Weiss, the Rabbi Emeritus from the Riverdale Jewish Institute, he was presenting to, he presents every year to a whole group of rabbis before the high holidays. He was talking about a story where his dad, I don't remember where his dad was flying in from, and he was supposed to pick his dad up at the airport, but he had something very important. He called his dad before, you know, he left, and he told him he wasn't going to be able to do it. And his father just kept kind of guilting him into, like, what do you mean? You have to do this for me. You know, like, I think because of this mitzvah and the way that he understood the mitzvah. And, you know, I don't remember what he wound up doing, but I think it's a good example, though, of the balance, meaning, like, you know, if, I think he was like, oh, Rabbi Avi Weiss is so important and so famous, he can't go pick up his own father. Now, it depends on what he had, right? There are times, regardless of our jobs, where we really can get away. It might be slightly inconvenient, and there's times maybe where we can't. So that goes back to that balance.
Thank you. Anybody else? I just want to say that we run the gamut of many ages in this group. We have Eden and Cheryl, who still have young children. And then there are those of us who have grandchildren, and there are those of us who have great grandchildren. And so I think some of the subjects that we are dealing with are rather difficult. But that's part of the reason why this is an interdisciplinary class, so that we can draw from so many different resources. And so if anybody is at all uncomfortable at any point that we're talking, I apologize, but I just I think they are important subjects to be dealt with. Yes, Susan.
I just thought it was interesting what Rabbi just said, and that is the whole question of parents visiting guilt upon their adult children. I just think it's such a complicated and difficult thing to handle when it's passed down in that direction. And I don't know if anybody has any ideas about it, but I have some examples in my family, and it's very difficult.
I agree with that. I think it, you know, again, it goes back to trying to find balance, but sometimes these conversations are too loaded and sometimes they have too much baggage. But at least in theory, the idea would be, because I think there's times, like, you know, even Avi Weiss's story, I can't even remember exactly the detail, but I think in the end, he may have picked up his father. I do think there's times where, you know, a parent can say to their child, you know, I'd like you to do this, or it'd be nice if you did this. And what the parent is saying is right. And then there's times when the child's done a ton of things, or the child just says, too many other things going on in their life where, you could hire a car service and you're going to be just fine. And I really can't get away from what I'm doing, so it really depends on the relationship and it depends on the situation. But they can be they can almost be sometimes impossible things to talk about.
Harriet.
Okay.
There you go.
There I am. Two things. First, we talk about respect for our parents, but what about a situation which I've heard many times, where as parents are aging, and when it's time for the children to take away the keys to the car, when they're really not capable any longer of making those decisions and don't have the capacity to drive as safely as they should. How does one go about convincing the parents without showing a lack of respect for the parents? Because in essence, if the child is becoming the parent in basically ordering them that they can't drive any longer, then they are disrespecting, but they are trying to do something that's in their best interest. So what would you suggest is the right approach?
I don't think there's one right approach. And I'll be curious what Susan, Annette, and anyone else has to say. The only thing I would say about that is, there's different categories of kinds of issues. Let's say in this type of situation where you're caring for someone who's older, it could be a parent or someone else. There's things that you don't think they should do because it's not in their best interest, or it's not healthy for them, maybe what they're eating or their lack of eating. But that in some ways could be a more personal decision. And it's not as directly dangerous, let's say, as certainly driving a car where it's not only about their own health, but it's about the health and safety of other people.
Right.
So that takes on another whole level. And then, there could be an example of someone supposed to use a walker when they're home and they don't use it. Well, if they fell, God forbid, they would hurt themselves, but they're not going to hurt anyone else. Right. So there's different categories and levels. But I think when it comes certainly to the possibility of harming other people, the stakes are higher, and you have more principle and more mitzvahs to stand on to ratchet up what you need to do to get to where you need to get, assuming that maybe you also need to bring in a third party person, to get a third opinion, maybe a more neutral opinion. Maybe there's times where kids try to take their parents' keys away from them, their cars away from them, and maybe somebody else would say, you know what, it looks, as long as they don't drive at night, as long as they don't do this, they can still drive for a little bit. So there's all those different dynamics.
Okay, what about the and again, these are stories. Yeah, I belong to a caregivers group, so I've heard so many of these stories over the years, where they hide the keys to the car. Or another story was someone disabled the car so that when they got into the car, they couldn't drive it.
I think those are excellent ways if there's no other way to get through to somebody, because it's a little bit less humiliating to the person or whatever they're feeling in terms of negative. It's being deceptive, but you're being deceptive for a much larger goal, right? Safety of the person and safety of others.
Right. Okay. So that's acceptable. That's not disrespecting the parents in that regard.
No, I wouldn't say it is.
Okay.
Mother,
Thank
Shirley?
I would say it's
Sorry, Susan
disrespectful.
wanted to comment first. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying in the comments, there's a comment that we're looking at safety for everyone, which is really very important. A comment also from Susie about enlisting the person's doctor to deliver the message. So they're
Oh,
using it in a
they
professional-
have. They have. They have. People. A lot of times they get, especially when they're in the beginning stages of dementia. Sometimes it's a very difficult situation. I've heard the stories many times. So I was just curious as to
I don't know
how.
if you're seeing the chats, because there's one other comment that Barbara Taffet mentioned, which she said there's some driving schools which provide special evaluations for older people.
Wow, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
And I think
Yeah,
if you go onto some of the sites, you'll probably find some more ideas about what other tactics to take in terms of looking out for everyone's safety as well, because it is such a common predicament. You know, independence in a car is really tied together.
Yes.
And
Very much.
you know, we look at self-determination too, and you know, people are allowed to make bad decisions, but when those bad decisions can be harmful to someone, then that's another situation, which is the piece about driving.
I'm just wondering if that's going to make it easier for when we get to the time when our kids say we shouldn't drive anymore, we'd be better about it, because it's going to happen. And it happens, you know, there's going to come a time when we can't drive anymore, and maybe we can be a little bit more sanguine about it, knowing that it is going to happen. But what I really want to say is, and this may be a source for a lot of discussion and argument, is that when we get older, like I'm in my 80s now, and I find, and a lot of you may find, that people really don't care what we say or what we think. And you could be with your big family with nieces and nephews, and when I am with them, I try to say as little as possible, because if they ask me something, I'll answer. But if they don't, and God forbid you say the words, when I was younger or in my day, eyes begin to roll. And I just find that people, younger people, are not that interested in what we think and what we have to say. And I'm not talking about love or respect. I'm just talking about, it's like being called cute. Any of you been called cute? If my husband, because I'm very lucky that we still like each other a lot, if he should give a sign of affection in front of strangers, or a little hug or a kiss, ooh, isn't that cute? I don't want to be cute. But that's how I feel now, older, that people really don't care what we think. That's how I feel. So I keep quiet most of the time.
Interesting.
Anybody?
talk a
I
lot
don't
at
think
the
you should keep quiet.
Please talk a lot at the shul, because we love hearing what you have to say.
No, I'm not talking about people of my peers or in shul. I'm just talking
Yeah.
in
no, I
general.
hear
I
you.
think this country reveres youth and beauty, and
It
not
does,
so
it
much,
does.
not so much the elderly. I don't think so. That's it.
I would agree.
I just wanted to echo what Barbara said about the driving. The 3A's has something as well to do an evaluation, and it's not a bad idea to do that. But as far as making the car inoperable or taking away keys or something like that, unless you really have dementia and you're really having a problem, I think that's very deceptive.
It is, I agree.
And I think, you know, you're not honoring your mother or your father by doing that. And there must be some other way to respond to them to do that, unless they're really, you know, out of it. But if my kids ever did that to me, I would not be happy.
Yes.
Barbara.
Barbara.
Yeah, I wanted to say two things. Well, first of all, the idea about the driving schools came from the doctor. The doctor does not want to be in the position of being the one to make this pronouncement. And that was the solution, is to find one of these places. I want to change the subject altogether. What do you do when you have a parent who does not honor their parents? How are you supposed to behave to that parent?
Are you talking about like the grandchild sees their parent not honoring the
Yes.
grandparent? Okay.
Yes.
Uh-huh. That's a tough situation. How's who supposed to respond? The grandparent?
No, how is the grandchild supposed to behave to their own parent when they see
Right.
terrible behavior?
I mean, aren't they gonna, I mean, I think from what you're saying is there's a good chance they're gonna learn terrible behavior.
Well, yes, but even is it right to do kindnesses and to honor the person who has done those bad things?
Are you talking about the grandparents that have done terrible things?
The parents, the grandchildren watch their parents
Oh,
mistreat
the
the grandparents. So how should the grandchildren behave? There's all sorts of discussions in Jewish literature about the role and responsibility of kids towards their parents if their parents do things that are wrong. I mean, I think it's some of the stuff that I was looking at to prepare for this was more about parents who do things directly to the children, which are very harmful. A parent can kind of almost forego the mitzvah that a child would have to honor them if the parents behave in ways which are harmful to the children. Now, the parents misbehaving and not treating their own parents well is less harmful directly to the grandchildren watching it. But if they're behaving in horrible ways, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. It's a sad question, but it's an interesting question.
Well, that question, I think your behavior should be determined by what you see as right or wrong. And if you see a parent or acting badly, to answer that, you see a parent acting badly, that doesn't give you the right to not honor that parent. That doesn't mean you should be an accomplice to treating the grandparent badly. But in other areas, I think what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And there's no justification for treating a parent badly, even though that parent has maybe treated you badly. Now, I have no right to speak because I was very fortunate with my parents, but that's the way I look at it. But I wanted to say something else that nobody's mentioned. The most difficult part to me, most difficult thing about growing old is seeing friends and family become weak, become sick, and worst of all, developing dementia, where they lose totally who they are. And this kind of thing, watching this kind of thing very slowly. And then also losing people. The older you get, the more people you lose. And going through that, losing people that you care about, either through death or through seeing them suffer and get weaker and weaker, people who you remember as being young and strong, and watching them decline, I think is psychologically one of the most painful things that you have to go through. And I think that's the thing about old age that is absolutely the most painful. And this has been sort of interesting, but I don't think anything has been discussed that addresses dealing with that aspect of growing old, because I think that's the worst. And that was something that I was hoping might be partially addressed in this.
Can I say something? Sandra, I started a book club many years ago at my neighborhood library. Most of the people in the book club are older than I am. I have so many women in their late 80s and in their 90s who are self-sufficient, who are intelligent, who are sharp, have taught me so much that my philosophy is I would rather celebrate their lives while they're so active and so phenomenal and still able to teach me things than dwell on the fact that, we're all going to die. And yes, it's very painful to watch people you love die, but I think it's more important to celebrate life while life is still there.
Well, I think it's fine to celebrate life. I think that's wonderful. When there are people in our temple also who are able to live to old age in good health and with their faculties. But when one encounters in one's life
Absolutely.
one loss after another, and sicknesses and pain. My niece put on Facebook, which I don't do Facebook very much, and she's on it all the time, and she does personal things on it. My father has a PhD from Stanford, and now he can't tell time. She's watching her father, who has vascular dementia, gradually, and she's the one who's taking care of him. He's in a facility, obviously. Watching that, and as you get older, you see more and more of that.
Mhm.
More and more people that you care about, and both friends and family,
Yes.
that decline. Now, it's true, there are people who are happy and successful, and it's nice to focus on those people. And it's nice to be with people like that. But that doesn't take away with the older you get, the more friends you lose,
Yes,
more
absolutely.
pain you see.
Yeah.
Sandy, look, you're raising a profound question. There's many profound questions and painful questions about life. I don't think there's an answer to that. Alzheimer's and dementia are some of the worst kinds of ways to watch people decline when they lose their sense of self and they lose their ability to do things. That's something that I feel like, when we die and we should all live and be well for a long time, that we should take up with God. How could there be diseases like that in the world? But there are. And, you mentioned your niece, where we talk about caregivers, and I don't know what kind of resources there are, but you can't be around that all the time. I mean, you can be, but I think that's very difficult. So, if you're in a position where you can be around sometime to do the mitzvah of kibud av v'em that we talked about, but that you're not surrounded all the time, because if you're surrounded by it all the time, it's very, very, very dark. But, I think both of what you and Harriet said is true. There's profound sadness and difficulty, and there's incredible strength and beauty. And some people are incredibly fortunate that they don't have as much. Nobody has none, but they don't have as much of the darkness. And some people are totally surrounded by the darkness. But there's no good answer for that. It's a horrible thing.
Well, how do you deal with this is my question.
Medication helps, Sandy.
Um,
I'm not.
I think Sandy, what you're asking is incredibly important. And I think what is good is that as part of our synagogue, we have this group to talk, to have this class and give people an opportunity to speak. And maybe it's something that we can continue to focus on more so. I don't know the answer to that, but it's definitely an important question. And that I didn't expect that we would go into a discussion of aging through the ages without hitting on those very important questions. And I think that Susan has given us some resources, and just that we need to avail ourselves of as many resources as we can. And whether those resources are classical resources or the modern resources that she's offered, and as somebody else said, as Harriet said, we have to look at the good parts, the good parts of our day as well. Anyway, the hour is late, and I don't want to tire you all out for next week. So next week, we'll talk about establishing a legacy and doing it when you want, doing it now, doing it later. I appreciate your all being here again. And I wish you a good night. And again, if people have felt any pain tonight, I apologize, but there are some issues with which we cannot deal without feeling some pain. So if we can do it in this safe space, I'm very happy for that.
Thank you, Annette, very much.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Everyone,
Good
great to
night.
be
Thanks,
with you.
Susan. Thanks, Rabbi.
Welcome. Thank you.